So now we're going to talk about a second writing skill, and it's a skill that we call hedging. It is, I think, such an interesting skill because it really shows the connection between grammar and the words that we use and the meaning that we're trying to express to somebody. So first, let's talk about what hedging is. So what I want you to do is I want you to read these two sentences and ask yourself, how do they sound different? So let's read the first one. It says, people are struggling like I am and need more help. Now let's look at the second sentence. Many people are struggling like I am and need more help. What's the difference here? The simple difference is adding many before people. And how does that change the strength of that statement? In the second sentence, the writer is hedging. If we say people are struggling like I am, we are suggesting that it's all people, that it's everybody. That is too strong. One really important feature about academic writing is that we control how strong our statements are. So by adding many and saying many people, that's more believable than saying people. Because if we just say people, we are saying something is 100% true for everybody. And when you say that, people can say, no, wait a minute, that's not true, I disagree. So many is what we would call a hedge. It's a hedging word because it's used to control our observation and our opinion. So we hedge for that reason. We want to be able to control how strong our opinions are and our observations are because we want to avoid overgeneralizations. An overgeneralization is saying that something is 100% true or false. So if we say everybody is worried about COVID-19, well, maybe that's true, but you can't say something like everyone or everybody because you can never claim that something is 100%. So we could say many people, we could say most people are worried. We could say almost all people are worried. Those are hedges that are controlling the strength of our statement. So I want you to compare these two sentences, and I want you to ask yourself in the second sentence, what language is the writer using to hedge? You can pause here if you want, and I'm going to go ahead and explain. So in the second sentence, you see this quantifier, a number. So they say a number of stores and restaurants have laid people off. A number of has the meaning of many, right? Many stores and restaurants. We don't want to suggest that all stores and restaurants have laid people off. And if we just say that, just say stores and restaurants, we're suggesting that it's all of them, and we don't want to do that. We don't want to make an overgeneralization. So quantifiers are words like a number of, millions of, several, some, many, most, a lot of. These are hedges that we use to control our statements, and they're very useful to use in your writing so that your writing is more controlled and therefore more believable. So you want to start using these expressions more often in your writing. Now let's look at another way to hedge. So you can also hedge with certain verbs. So I have 3 sentences here. I want you to read all 3 and ask yourself, in which 2 do we have verbs that are hedges? Again, if you want to pause here, you can before I give the explanation. So in these 3 sentences, it's the last 2 sentences that contain a hedge. If we say the government should consider a universal basic income, should is used to show that this is our opinion, but we're not suggesting that they absolutely must do it. Ought to has the same meaning as should. We use ought to a lot more in writing. So if we say, I think the government ought to consider a universal basic income, it has the same exact meaning as should. It's also a modal, and it's a modal we use to express an opinion, but also to control our opinion. Interesting, when people use ought to in speaking, they say oughta. They say, I think the government oughta consider. They do a very strange reduction. Now, must, in the first sentence, that is not a hedge. It says the government must consider a universal basic income. Must is a very strong word. You're saying this is almost absolutely necessary. Now, you can use must if you truly believe that, and if you've supported that with a lot of details and explanations to justify why the government needs to consider a universal basic income. But we use should and ought to more often because we are trying to control what our statement is. Now, if you look at the third sentence one more time with ought to, there's another verb in there that is a hedge. And can you see what that is? So here the writer has added I think. So when we use I think, it's also a way to hedge or kind of control our language a little bit more. I think the government ought to consider, right? So you're not saying a statement that is too strong, and you're allowing other people to perhaps disagree with you. If you just say they must consider, then you're not really giving people the chance to disagree with you. So I think, and we also say sometimes I think that. You can use that whether it's not necessary, but if you want to. And you can also say I believe that. That's another common hedge. Okay, now let's look at these sentences, and I'm again asking you which statement is more controlled, which one has the hedge. Again, if you want to pause here, you can. Okay, so in these two sentences, it's the first sentence that contains the hedge. Could is used to express possibility, something that we're not certain about. So if we say that financial effects of the pandemic could last for years to come. Now, we may believe this very strongly, but we're trying to control our statement so that we're not sounding like we know everything. So could is a hedge for possibility. Compare that to the second sentence that uses will. The financial effects of the pandemic will last for years to come. Will means 100%. That's an overgeneralization. You cannot prove this. We don't know exactly what will happen in the years to come. So that is too strong of a statement. So this is a chart just kind of reviewing what those hedging verbs are. If we're giving an opinion, we often use should and ought to. If we're trying to show possibility of what might happen in the future, we use could or may or might. And then we also have these verb phrases, I think or I believe, which we can use with that if we want, but it's not necessary. So again, hedging is all about controlling how strong your statement is. It is such a useful writing skill because when people read your writing with hedges, it makes you sound like you are considering that there could be other opinions and you are opening the discussion for debate. Thanks.